You're listening to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Tiffany Cruikshank. Our podcast brings you information and resources to enhance the therapeutic effects of your practice based on a deeper understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the integration of modern science and research with traditional practices and experiences. Join me and my co-hosts, Rachel Land and Katya Barch, as we dive into all things yoga, research, and wellness. All right, welcome back. I am so excited to have Erin Holt here. She is such a fantastic nutritionist, and I have personally been following her for a while. I feel like her way of looking at things and my way of looking at things, both as an acupuncturist and a yoga teacher, are very similar. She goes well beyond the conventional nutritionist, I feel like, in so many ways, really looking at the person holistically, which is what we do at Yoga Medicine, really blending the three-dimensionality of the person and really acknowledging the importance of so many other contributing factors like mindset and movement, and obviously focusing a lot on the nutritional component and working with the individual in front of her. And she's worked with a lot of clients over the years, has been in practice for I think over 11 years now, and really does this kind of research-based, individualized approach, which really gels with what we do. And again, I'm like such a fan of hers and have been such a huge believer in the power of nutrition and really thinking of food as medicine. I think is so important to consider everything that you put in your mouth as being really therapeutic. And I know there's so much conflicting advice out there. And I know you're like me, and it is very individualized, but we're going to try and get to some general themes and give you a good overview. So those of you working with autoimmunity can have some good takeaways to use, and hopefully some good resources as well. We'll mention some resources at the end. Also, we've already talked a bit about autoimmunity with our rheumatologist, who's a yoga medicine teacher as well, really from a yoga perspective. So we'll put that link in the show notes as well. But for now, let's look at how nutrition can be an important component to this approach to autoimmunity, and maybe just starting with why it's important and how we got here.
Well, it's important to me personally. This is a very there's a topic that's near and dear to my heart because I went through the medical ringer like so many women do, and I'm like, something's not right. I had my daughter 10 years ago, and I'm like, something's not right. And a lot of my healthcare providers were like, hey, that's just called being a mom. Like, you kind of got to suck it up. It will get better. You're just tired. And long story less long, it turns out I had an autoimmune condition brewing, and just nobody really took the time to take me seriously and listen to the symptoms. And so I kind of had to claw my way through it to get a diagnosis. And I really don't want that for our clients and anybody that I can help. There's different phases or stages of autoimmunity, and the longer the autoimmune process persists, the more challenging it becomes to untangle it. And I really want to spread awareness around this because if we can get to it early, we have so much power over the, like, essentially halting the autoimmune process. And the Autoimmune Association estimates that close to 50 million Americans struggle with some type of autoimmune disease. It is one of the most diagnosable diseases that we have. 1 in 12 women will end up with autoimmunity. That's a pretty staggering stat to me. 1 in 24 men. So there is this gender bias where it does hit women twice as much as men. But it's a really, really big deal. It's very complex. It's a little confusing. The conventional healthcare model doesn't have a lot of really great solutions. If you dive into the medical literature, the number one word you will see is unknown. Unknown. It's unknown etiology, unknown origin. We have no idea why this is happening. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think we can figure out some reasons, that some causes, some contributing factors. We can talk about that today. But it is pretty much a question mark in the world of health. And so a lot of people are being underserved here.
I'm curious, and I'm curious if you have like a gut, no pun intended, but a gut instinct on why women are so much more affected by this than men. Obviously, we don't know for sure, but do you have a gut feeling?
I have maybe a little bit more than a gut feeling because I've worked
Okay.
with so many women. One, hormones do impact it. So we go through these huge hormonal shifts, these huge endocrine transitions, these big fluctuations. And in the pregnancy, postpartum, perimenopause, menopause, all of those big hormone shifts, we're more likely to develop or for autoimmunity to be exacerbated. And so there is this hormone component, and we can't really quite put our finger on why. Of course, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, all of our sex hormones can dramatically influence our immune system. It's like psychoneuroimmunology. All the systems are interconnected and talking to each other all of the time. So that's part of it. I think it's more, has a lot more to do with how women are conditioned to behave in society. There's traits that are associated with chronic illness, not just autoimmunity, but chronic illness in general. It is the putting your needs last, putting everybody else's needs first, keeping the peace, just making sure everybody else is comfortable at the expense of your own, really over identifying with duty and responsibility, being like hyper responsible for other people, not being able to say no, the inability to express oneself. Repression of anger is a really big one. And so when I look at this list, it's like, oh my goodness, this is like how girls and women are taught to behave. This, like, we expect women to be boundaryless almost. Like there's such an extreme lack of boundaries that you don't know where you end and somebody else begins, or where your responsibility for somebody else ends. And it's like essentially the underlying mechanism of autoimmunity is you can't differentiate or distinguish self from non-self. So I think there's a lot of different factors. I think it's lazy to just blame hormones. I think they're part of the picture, but I don't think they're the whole picture.
Right. I mean, and if we live long enough, we all go through those transitions as females, and we don't all get autoimmunity. And I'm so glad you said that, because it definitely resonates with me in my practice. I don't specialize in autoimmunity, but I definitely see that connection with that empath and like that ability to take everything on for everyone else. And I think there's definitely, obviously, a connection there. Talk a little bit about, let's talk a little bit about just autoimmunity in general. I know we've talked about this a little bit on a previous episode, but just, I mean, there's so many different forms, and it's just helpful, I think, to put all those out there a little bit.
So there's over 100 different autoimmune conditions. That's how commonplace it is. So type 1 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, colitis, that's your IBD, your irritable bowel disease, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, psoriasis, celiac disease. All of these are classified as autoimmune conditions. But we can really think about it, and I think we should be thinking about it as one condition. So no matter what your specific diagnosis is, you have one underlying issue, and that is autoimmunity. It is immune dysregulation. And I think this is important when we start to think about treatment protocols and ways to address this. We need to be addressing it as immune dysregulation. And so it's really hallmarked by the presence of autoantibodies. So we develop antibodies against our own tissue. It's often been described as self-attack. I don't love that personally. I don't think the body like makes mistakes and start attacking itself. But I mean, you could definitely call it self-attack. And there can be systemic, where it impacts multiple organ systems like lupus. And then there can be organ specific, like something like a Hashimoto's that's attacking the thyroid. But there's really no one thing that causes it. And I think that's an important thing to know and understand. I love what Gabor Mate says about the immune system. He says the immune system does not exist in isolation from daily experience. And I think it's so important to see our bodies through that lens. Like our bodies are reflections of a life lived. And so how we are living our lives and what we are exposed to is going to impact our immune system. So certain things that are contributing factors to autoimmunity is our food. The antigenicity of food is changing. So antigenicity is basically a fancy word of saying how likely your immune system is to react to food. Our immune system shouldn't be reacting to the foods that we're eating, but it is. diseases. So that's a problem. That's putting the immune system on high alert all the time. Inflammatory diets can be a huge contributing factor. The fact that our toxin exposure is increasing, we can begin to lose chemical tolerance. When we lose chemical tolerance, we're more likely to lose self-tolerance, which is autoimmunity. And then these huge microbiome changes that we're seeing collectively, that the ecosystem within us is changing because the ecosystem outside of us is changing. And all of that can really influence your overall immune health.
And I think it's really important to note too, because there's always some controversy around these things. Like, these are things you can test for. You can actually put your finger on. And yes, sometimes it takes a lot of work and digging, and a lot of times finding a good practitioner who has a lot of experience, like Erin does in this field. But these are most of these things are things you can test for to see, is my body responding to these foods? How is my microbiome? I mean, some are harder. Microbiome is a pretty big thing, but I think it's also a reason why. I mean, it is complex. It's because there are so many different components of it, and probably a big part of why our current system doesn't do a great job of treating it. And I think it is a challenging, one of the many challenging things. I think in Chinese medicine, I always think about, like, the challenging issues in Western medicine are usually the things that respond well in acupuncture and Chinese medicine is probably similar with nutrition, maybe, but there is not a great solution from a Western medicine perspective. And I think understanding that is really helpful too. And I know you're, really good at explaining a lot of these things.
Yeah, I hope so. With autoimmunity, there is no cure. Our current understanding of autoimmunity is that there is no cure. But the hopeful news is that remission is possible. So we can get people into remission. I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. I'm in remission. It does not have a chokehold over my life. Hard stop. So that I always want to share the hopeful news too when we're talking about these things that can feel a little overwhelming or scary. So remission is possible, but our current treatment strategies aren't really doing a great job getting people there. So we do need a different approach. So we have to look at the current approach that isn't making tons of headway and say, what can we do differently? The number one question that I get whenever we're talking about autoimmunity is, how do I heal X? How do I heal Hashimoto's? How do I heal psoriasis? How do I heal, and just fill in the blank with whatever the autoimmune condition they have is? And it's not a bad question. It's totally fair, valid question, but it showcases how we're currently thinking about autoimmunity, which is part of the reason that we're not making a lot of headway with autoimmunity. Because when it comes to autoimmunity, the treatment isn't unique to the diagnosis or the condition. It's unique to the individual. And the conventional model, it's a little different than, let's say, a root cause model. Because the conventional model, the diagnosis does kind of give us the treatment. Once we can diagnose this, and by the way, it can take up to 10 years and 20 practitioners to actually receive an autoimmune diagnosis. But once we finally diagnose this, then we know what to do. And some of the conventional model is to kind of turn off and shut down the immune system with immunosuppressants. And whenever I talk about this, it's never to medication shame. Like, I am so grateful that we have these tools at our disposal, but wouldn't it be great if we didn't wait until it got to a point where we had to shut down the whole immune system?
Yes.
It's kind of an important system. So with a functional or a root cause approach, the diagnosis doesn't give us the treatment because the diagnosis doesn't tell us why. So if somebody comes to me and they say, look, I have a Hashimoto's diagnosis, that doesn't tell me why your immune system is attacking the thyroid. In order to manage autoimmunity and potentially even get it into remission, we really have to understand the unique triggers for each individual person. And this is where it can kind of get a little complex, a little confusing, and why it is helpful to work with a practitioner who really understands this, because it is a complex web, and untangling that web looks totally different for every single person, even with the same autoimmune disease. So again, two people with Hashimoto's, the treatment might look totally different from a root cause approach. And it might be helpful to kind of talk about the different factors that I would be looking into with somebody if they did come to me with an autoimmune condition.
Yeah, I mean, I do just think that's what creates that potency. I mean, just like Chinese medicine, anyone who comes in with headaches, we've got a whole differential of many different diagnoses. And I think that individuality is what really makes whatever approach we're taking, nutritional or acupuncture or yoga, like so potent. And I think it is nuanced though. It does mean that we don't like instantly, we can't go to someone, you know, you have those people as yoga teachers, we get those people like, I have X, you know, what do I do? And yes, we can put these things on the internet, these like 3 poses for your back pain or for autoimmunity that we maybe see can be helpful in a lot of cases, but the real, I think, efficacy comes with that individualization. So yeah, let's talk about some of the big concepts there.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of grace and patience, on behalf of the practitioner and on behalf of the patient, obviously. And there is some trial and error with autoimmune treatment strategies and treatment protocols. And I like to let people know that, because I never want somebody to feel like they're failing. Like, I'm trying this thing and it's not working. It's okay. I also train clinicians and train practitioners, and I say the same thing to them. Like, if you're going to be working with the autoimmune population, you're going to have a lot of patience for yourself and their ability to heal. And you have to be comfortable with trial and error, because it can take some time. But I think of 6 different buckets, let's call them, when I'm thinking of drivers of autoimmunity. And if we want to take a root cause approach and figure out what their root causes are, these are the things that I'm thinking about. I mean, I'm a nutritionist, so I'm going to start with food and diet, a little bias there, but it's a big deal. So our industry, if somebody's coming to me eating kind of like the standard American diet, that is really the first place that I'm going to start, because we know that can contribute to inflammation in the body, and inflammation, unchecked chronic ongoing inflammation, can lead to immune dysregulation. So we really have to start there. I like to look at digestion, really treating it as a top-down process. Yes, microbiome, hugely influential over our entire immune system. But don't forget that your digestion in your gut is more than just what's living in your large intestine. It starts in the mouth and it goes all the way to your bum. So we really want to address digestion from tip to tail. Something, for example, like low stomach acid, which is pretty common, that can really set somebody up to have more food sensitivities if they're not breaking down their food into smaller and smaller bits. And so if somebody has a lot of food reactivity, their immune system is on overdrive every single time they eat. And that constant immune system overdrive can open up the doorway to autoimmunity. So we want to make sure digestion is working correctly. Some people have unique food triggers. So gluten is one of mine. I don't do well with it. I haven't. When I took gluten out of my life, it changed a lot of things 15 years ago. So trying to assess, do you have food triggers? Are there certain foods that you just need to avoid? And then getting plenty of variety. So I think of an abundant harvest. Like, I joke because when I drive to Maine, I live in New Hampshire. When I drive to Maine, I always pass by, I think it's a church, but there's this huge sign that says abundant harvest, and it always makes me smile. So I just totally stole that. But lots of variety is going to feed all of the beneficial species in your gut. So plant variety, color variety, it's really important for the health of the microbiome, which in turn is going to be important for the health of the immune system. So that's what I'm thinking about in terms of food and diet. Gut is another big one, microbiome imbalance, any dysbiosis. So maybe the good outweigh the bad. There's we do run stool tests in my practice, and I will tell you what I commonly see is a deficiency dysbiosis pattern. So the beneficial species are just low across the board, really, really, really common. And that is what's driving so much of your immune system. So we have to build those species back out. Of course, people love to talk about leaky gut and intestinal permeability. Look, it's important. It is a huge factor. I just think that, especially in my space, in the functional medicine world, we have made leaky gut like the darling.
Yes.
Look, I've seen a lot of leaky gut protocols. I've yet to see one heal autoimmunity. So it is a factor in the overall process. If there's inflammation in your gut and it's gaining access to the bloodstream, that can certainly trip wire. immune dysregulation for sure, but it's not as, I wish it was as simple as like fixing a stool test or healing leaky gut, and then your autoimmunity just goes away. All knows how it works out in practice. So food, gut, infections, we can see some of these in the gut: bacterial infections, viruses, parasites. There's this process known as molecular mimicry. And so sometimes there are things that our bodies are exposed to that kind of confuses the immune system. And so we launch an attack against this antigen, this thing outside of our body, but it looks like something inside of our body. And so we start to attack our own tissue. And so sometimes infections can tripwire that process. So we do want to screen for those. And then we have environmental toxins, chemical exposure, our biotransformation pathways, like our detox pathways. We want to make sure those are running efficiently. Like I said, we can lose chemical tolerance. So this is like somebody, if you walk into the grocery store and you go into the the cleaning aisle, where all the cleaning supplies are, and you immediately get a headache. Or you walk into an Airbnb that has a Glade plug-in and you feel sick. That's like an indication of loss of chemical tolerance. And so we can see that go hand in hand with autoimmunity. The last one, or the last two, stress. Huge. It is the number one contributing factor and exacerbator of autoimmunity. It is the thing that can pull somebody out of remission. It is the thing that can flare somebody up. So we really need to understand our own unique stressors. And some of them we're aware of, and some of them we're not. Like what we talked about at the beginning, a lot of people are carrying around the responsibility of everybody in their life, but they think they're doing a good thing. They're like, look at me, I'm so productive. I'm so helpful. Look at me over functioning. So they're not even aware that the stressors are actually stressing them out. But that's something that we need to look at. And then mindset, our beliefs. If you don't believe you have the capacity to heal, it's going to be a real challenge for you to heal. So do you believe that you can heal? Do you believe you're worthy of healing? We do need to look at trauma. We know that there's a clear link between childhood traumatic stress, adverse childhood experiences, and autoimmunity. So those are the big six that I'm thinking about when I'm trying to uncover somebody's root cause. Like, how did we get here?
And I think, it's hard because I think for most people with autoimmunity of whatever sort, there's usually, in my experience, at least one or two, at least a couple of these buckets. And I think yoga does a really great job at working with those last two. And sometimes that can be enough. But I think when you're working with something like autoimmunity, it is generally speaking really helpful to have them working with a nutritionist or holistic practitioner who can address some of these other buckets, because generally speaking, there's something going on in one of those as well. And, some people might have a great diet. They might already, sometimes we get these people who are, informed and have done some research and are already eating a pretty good anti-inflammatory diet. And it's really about how their body's processing it. It's their gut, it's their microbiome, or there's an infection or environmental toxin. I mean, I think environmental toxins are actually, I think, a really hard one too, because so many practitioners aren't trained in that. And unless you're like a holistic doctor of some sort, naturopath, nutritionist, functional medicine doctor, generally you're not trained in that. And even all of those categories it's not like a requirement for people in those trainings to get that. And so having some training in environmental toxins, I think, can be challenging sometimes to find someone who has that, and really important. Sometimes the missing link, because I do think a lot of people, due to social media and internet these days, are on top of things like their food and their gut and maybe even infections if they're working with a practitioner. But the environmental toxins can often get left out. And I think the stress, like you said, some people underestimate it. And I think stress is almost always a factor in autoimmunity, as well as mindset and beliefs and trauma. So I just a reminder too, because I know there's always a lot of yoga teachers listening, of how important it is to work with other healthcare providers. We always stress this in our trainings, but I think especially with autoimmunity, I love these 6 buckets. It's such a great way of breaking things down, and so important to remember working with someone, because the quicker we can get someone better, the better, right? And if someone has the time and the means, of course, to do it, it's so worth it to go through this process of really finding that unique combination for you, which is so different for each person.
Building out a referral network of other providers is like it's such compassionate care for the people that you're going to work with, because you can't do it all. No matter what kind of practitioner you are, you can't do it all. And this is a big conversation that I have to have with a lot of the practitioners that I train. It's like, you can't do it all. And it doesn't come from a place of like an ego driven, like I want to be the one that fixes them. It's like, we believe that we have to carry it all, especially if I find it more commonly true for people in the alternative health space, whatever that means, that like they're coming to us. They feel that conventional medicine failed them, so they're coming to us. So we have to be the hero. We have to be the savior. And that is not true. Do what you do it really well, and have a referral network to refer out to people. And just, I mean, I've been a patient before, and I just appreciate that so much when somebody says like, this is the limit of what I can do. Let's bring somebody else on board, you know?
Yes. Amen. I mean, I feel like we say this all the time. And I just think the more you refer out, the more it comes back to. And it's so important. It's so important to have that for so many different reasons. So, okay, let's talk about the paradigm shift, in modern medicine, and what's important about shifting our perspective there.
Well, I think a lot of what we talked about is like making sure we're treating the individual instead of the diagnosis is huge. But then also, I think I mentioned this in the beginning, that we can consider autoimmunity in 3 different phases. And there's clear distinctions between those 3. And so the first one can be considered silent autoimmunity, where there are the presence of antibodies, but there's no symptoms. So generally people don't know, unless they're screening for autoantibodies, which is not most people, they don't know that they're in this. Stage 2 or phase 2 is autoimmune reactivity, where there are the presence of antibodies and they have symptoms, but there's no tissue destruction. And then phase 3, antibodies present, symptoms present, but tissue destruction has set in. So an MRI might show plaque, or X-ray would show clear RA. And unfortunately, the current medical paradigm is that it doesn't actually get classified into true autoimmune disease until this 3rd stage, until the tissue is destroyed. By that point, the autoimmune process is like so well underway that it becomes a lot more difficult to untangle. So my hope and my goal in a lot of my education is to try to get people to kind of catch it early, catch it in that stage 1, but more likely stage 2. So I want to explain. So when somebody comes in to see us, I mean, they're not coming in, it's a virtual practice, but you get the drift. Show up on the Zoom and they see us. This is what I'm thinking, like red flags. Like this, we should look into autoimmunity. They have chronic, ongoing mystery symptoms. They have been sick and struggling for years. They've tried different interventions. Some of them work, but not long term. Like, oh, I started doing this, I felt a little bit better, but then I just kind of ended up right back where I started. They've kind of bebopped around between different practitioners. They've collected diagnoses. So like I was told I had fibromyalgia, and then I was told this, and then I was told this, but they're not really sure like what they've got. They might have multiple food sensitivities or chemical sensitivities like we were talking about before. And so all of this kind of tells me we should potentially be thinking about autoimmunity. And then we also want to think about it from an emotional perspective as well, because these people have been through it. It takes a long ass time for somebody to actually get diagnosed with autoimmunity, like I said earlier, because there's no one test. There's no like one test where you can be like, yep, you've got it. You've got the autoimmunity. And so they kind of just get bounced around from specialist to specialist to specialist. 45% of autoimmune patients have been labeled as chronic complainers. That just breaks my heart. I was there. I was one of them. I was like, dude, I'm just I'm just a hypochondriac. I'm just making this all up in my head, or I'm just like so sensitive. Like, what's wrong with me? So there's this distrust in not only the medical system, but in their selves, in their own bodies. There's this sense of shame that they carry around. Like, why am I so broken? What is wrong with me? So if somebody comes to me feeling that way, I'm like, I always try to meet them at that exact level because they need to be seen, they need to be witnessed, they need to be validated, they need somebody to listen to their story and actually believe them. So those are sort of the red flags, but then there's also clinical clues on just basic everyday blood work. We can talk about some functional lab testing and deeper dives that we might do if we do suspect autoimmunity or they have a diagnosable condition. But these are the things that I'm looking at, like a standard blood panel that would also lead me to believe that there might be autoimmunity at play. And so if you're listening to this and you have like a recent, comprehensive panel, pull it out and look at this. Low white blood cell count. So this is going to be on every CBC you do, white blood cell count. If it's low, you can suspect autoimmunity. This is just telling us the immune system is exhausted. It's depleted. It's compromised. ANA, anti-nuclear antibody, is a good marker for autoimmune activity in the body. It's a pretty inexpensive test to kind of just throw into any blood work. So you can ask your primary care physician for that. And then there's certain inflammatory markers. Acute phase reactants is what they're called. So when there's acute inflammation in the body, these will be elevated. So this is like a sedimentation rate, a C-reactive protein. You might see it written as HSCRP. If those are high, that's telling us, yeah, there's inflammation going on in the body right now. It doesn't tell us where it is, but it tells us that it's there. And so if there's like this cluster of clues that lead me to believe that autoimmunity might be present, then we can do more of a deep dive looking at some of the drivers of that autoimmunity.
Yeah, which is the longer process sometimes, of course, as you mentioned. But again, I think for someone who's been through this, and again, these are the people who have been searching for so long. I think you did such a great job of describing that. I mean, those of you who are healthcare providers listening, which I know is a good chunk of our listeners as well, know these people. And I think once you get to that point, to be able to have anything, even doing the work to find that, I think is so appreciated. And I love that you pay tribute to all of the different parts of the body that are affected by this, our mental and emotional state, our, and acknowledging that and welcoming them and meeting them where they're at. I think, it's so in line with what we do at Yoga Medicine too. I think we're just very similar in different professions, which I love. Let's see. I mean, I think so important to acknowledge catching this early. So I just want to like bookmark that for people catching this early. We've talked about a few tests that they can ask their primary care provider for potentially. I think if people are to that point where they know they have autoimmunity, I do think it's really helpful, as I'm sure you do. I'll let you speak to that too, of like finding someone to work with and and who can do the deep work there as well, of course.
You know what I didn't mention, and it's very specific to Hashimoto's thyroiditis, but good luck, but asking for a full thyroid panel. Thyroid issues are very, very, very common in women, and we're just seeing more and more of them. And we know that true hypothyroidism, most of it is autoimmune in nature. So it is the autoimmunity that's driving it. And this is where the conventional approach is actually to wait until the gland itself has enough destruction that it stops making thyroid hormone. And then they go in and they replace the thyroid hormone. Again, grateful to have it, but like, why do we have to wait for it to get so bad? And if you feel tired, achy, run down, heart palpitations, brain fog, cold all the time, memory loss, constipated. I'm trying to think of the other cluster of symptoms that are associated with hypothyroidism. Any of that, I would definitely advocate for getting your thyroid tested. Typically, your PCP is going to run TSH, maybe a T4 if you're lucky. I really like to see more, if you're lucky, I like to see more lab markers there, but always, always advocate for testing the antibodies as well, anti-TPO antibodies and thyroglobulin antibodies, because that can tell us if Hashimoto's is at play. And that's a big one. Pretty specific to the thyroid, but another screening tool to add to your tool bag.
And thyroid is such a big one. I mean, I personally actually have hypothyroid. I don't have autoimmunity. I'm one of the few who doesn't. Mine's very genetic. Most of
Oh,
my family has it as well. But I also, so I see it through that lens, but I also think it's a really common issue in females. It's something that I think we should be screening for a lot more. And yeah, TSH doesn't really tell us much. It just tells us if our brain's trying to stimulate the thyroid. And you really have to look at all of those things. So I feel like people are getting more awareness, at least, especially in the holistic provider realm, getting a good provider, holistic provider that has training in these things. And again, I'm sure we'll link to some resources at the end that you have, but I just think it's so important to find that person who can care to go into the detail because it really isn't that hard. I mean, it's more expensive to test all the full thyroid panel a little bit.
is it care or is it just like the time too? Because I
Yeah.
don't genuinely, I know that it's very in vogue to kind of speak down on doctors and like the medical system right now. And I get it. Like truly, they just chewed me up and spit me out. So I really, really understand. But I genuinely do not believe that anybody dedicates their life to medicine unless they genuinely want to help people. It's just this like
Yeah.
system that they get caught in and have to work in. And I can imagine it's like fighting an uphill battle every single day. So it's like they just don't have the time or the bandwidth to do this deep dive. They're working through an insurance model. And so, yes, going with the more holistic alternative functional root cause, whatever you want to label it, going that route can be more expensive, but you're also getting a different level of care, time, attention. Like, when's the last time you walked in and got 75 minutes of undivided care? You know what I mean? Like at your doctor.
Never. Yes. Yes.
So there is that too. There's more
Yeah.
space for the deep dive and more of the exploration and in saying, okay, well, we don't have the data that we need with this set of labs. What are other labs that we could be running to get us the data that we actually need to make headway here?
I agree. And I feel like I say this all the time. I think it's so important. I love that you said that. Like, I don't think our Western medical doctors should be in charge of everything. I really believe, for me personally, and it's unfortunate our insurance doesn't cover more of the holistic modalities because I think that's important, obviously, but I think Western medicine is there to keep you alive. Like, you go to them when you have an emergency or an extreme condition. Like, they have a really freaking important purpose, like that's some big shit. Like, don't I can't keep you alive. If you've been in a car accident, don't come to me. But our like profession, I'm just including, like you said, all of holistic medicine. There's a lot of different practitioners you can see are trained to see the nuance and to really refine your health and wellness and to hopefully prevent a lot of those things. And, you can't prevent everything. Life happens sometimes, but um, like my thumb, sometimes you have to have surgeries and things. And thank God for modern medicine and surgery and pharmaceuticals when they're needed. And yeah, I agree. The doctors are doing the best they can in a system that is challenging at best. And no one's got a great no one has a great answer yet. So, even in other countries, but yeah, I agree. Anyways, that was a
Well,
good.
if I break my arm, I'm not going to my naturopath.
Yes.
Or,
Yes.
the time that I went to the emergency room because I didn't poop for 12 days, they're like, we can't really help you. Like, I had to go to a colon hydrotherapist for that. Like, there's different tools for different situations. And I like how you we can't expect them to do everything. It's too much to put on one type of practice.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, having that arsenal of people you refer to, nothing creates burnout quicker. Than what you said is trying to do everything yourself. So I think as soon as you realize that as a yoga teacher, as a nutritionist, as an acupuncturist, of like having this great network of people you can refer to, the more freedom you have, the better you feel as well. I mean, because there's a lot of people listening to this who work with people with autoimmunity, and it can be a lot to
Mhm.
take on. And again, we talked about all those buckets. Like, there's no one profession that's going to address really well all of those buckets. I hope that many of them will at least look at all of them to some extent or maybe refer out. But again, if you try and do all of those yourself, you're going to be tired as a provider.
No, we do all of this because we're amazing. think those 6 buckets can fall under one. I think those 6 buckets that I like can actually fall under one type of practitioner, to be clear. And you know what I want to do too is for somebody who's listening, who's like, I don't need the clues to figure out if I have autoimmunity. I already know that I have it. Like I've got the Hashimoto's diagnosis and I just want to feel better. Like I have the diagnosis, but that doesn't mean that I have the treatment or the solution. I still want to feel better. And that's when we go into a bit more of a deep dive. That's when we go like deeper into those buckets. So we can look at your food. We can talk about diet. And we can talk about that here if you want to. We do lab testing to look at your gut. You mentioned a microbiome test. And so there's different types of stool tests. There's the stool test that you can get from your doctor that is culture and it's looking for the bigger pathogens. There's microbiome tests that are like a biome that I think you can just order online. And that's looking at it's a microbiome map. So it's looking at all the different critters that are in your gut. That doesn't really guide treatment. What we're looking at when we run a stool test is any imbalance that we can actually address. So it really drives clinical treatment. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing a biome, but it doesn't really give you necessarily actionable steps. So I really like the stool test, the type of stool test that we run for this particular reason, is that it tells us exactly what to do to help you feel better. We can pinpoint exactly why you're having the symptoms that you're having, and then we can untangle those symptoms by addressing it.
Yeah. And yes to what you said, I do think hopefully a practitioner is addressing all of this, but I do think it's challenging as a patient when your healthcare provider says, you need to work with stress or your mindset or your trauma. And, as yoga teachers, we get to spend an hour looking at those specific things and working with them over time and really getting to know them and their beliefs and getting to work with their nervous system, not just with like a 2-minute, like do some breath work, or which can sometimes be enough, right? As a practitioner, I'm sure you've experienced that. There are some quick, I use a lot of like yoga prescriptions with my patients as well. It's like, yes, sometimes it can be easy to just be like, here's the thing and do it. And other people really need exposure to those practices and help getting through them. Yeah.
Totally. And if you're a type of practitioner like I am, even asking the right questions can be so helpful. I think listening is a lost art form. But I remember talking to a client who was just dealing with a lot of other health issues. We had the labs to back it up, that things weren't great. And she was definitely the classic overfunctioner, eldest daughter, took care of everybody, her dad, her siblings, her kids, her husband, everybody. She was in charge of everybody. And there was an identity built around that. And so she told me one morning, she woke up at 4:30 a.m. So she had time to get the kids lunch packed and get them ready for school and get them like so on and so forth. And I just asked her, I was like, where's your husband during that time? And it wasn't a snarky, sassy comment. I was just, understand. And she just stared at me and she blinked because she couldn't even wrap her mind around the idea that she could potentially receive support. She was that much of an overfunctioner. So I was like, okay, so that's the thing that we need to work on. And like, she was working with a therapist. And I'm like, take this to your therapist. Like, that's the thing to unpack. And so I think we can kind of uncover clues. And I always like lab testing. I always say that I'm not just looking at the data, I'm looking at the human being behind the data. So I love how the lab testing can invite me deeper with that current client that I'm working with. But we can use that as a gateway. You can't argue with the data. The data is saying this based on our conversation. I think this is the thing that's driving this. How are we going to problem solve for this? And sometimes that looks like talking through it with another provider, whether it's a therapist or yoga medicine therapist or, something else.
I love that you do that. I think it's so skillful, but I also do think it's the exception and not the norm in really any profession. I feel like for me, and I talk about this a lot in our trainings too, is like listening and sensing who this person is. The context of their life is so important, not just, the physical exam or the test that you do. I think it's one of those intangibles that can be hard. Well, not necessarily been hard to train, but maybe just left out. So I just really appreciate, and you're so skillful at it. I appreciate that you do that.
Well, when I am training clinicians, that's a question that will often come up is like, and how? Like, how do you do that? And I always say you can only go as far with somebody else as you've been able and willing to go yourself. So I have practices that where I can sit with myself. I get to know myself. My most important relationship is the one that is to myself. I know myself very, very well. I have practices. I do a lot of yoga. I've been studying with Tiffany for literally close to 15 years now, I think, which is crazy. So I have these practices where I get to meet myself on a deeper level. I practice compassion, which is the willingness to turn toward my own suffering, self-compassion. So because I can do that with myself, I can do that with somebody else. Because I've been able to meet myself, I can then meet those parts in other people as well. And so I think that it's just having practices like yoga, having practices like breath work, anything that connects you deeper to yourself is going to inevitably make you a better practitioner.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love that. So what do we want to talk about food specifically? Are there some things I know, obviously, and I just want to say it again, we've said it a million times. Obviously, a lot of this is really sometimes nuanced, but also very individualized, sometimes not nuanced, but very individualized. Are there some like common takeaways as it applies to food and nutrition that you find to be kind of like across the board for autoimmunity that you could, yeah.
Yeah, I guess you started this by being like, we're going to talk about food and autoimmunity, and we have said nothing about food. So this is a great way to close things out. It is very, very individualized, but in some people, when I first I was really struggling with my health 10 years ago, and I had to be pretty diligent, and some would even say restrictive with my food because my immune system was so like bombastic all the time. It was just reacting to a lot of foods. So that I think that should be more short-term approach than long-term. In long-term, we should try to be eating as much variety as we can. But the basic stuff like highly processed foods are going to be more antigenic for the most part. So it's going to cause the immune system to say, wait a second, what is this? I'm not totally sure what this is. Food dyes, I swear, you guys, I've been talking about this for 10 years. Like, I know food dyes is a little sketchy to talk about with the political climate right now, but I promise you, I am not like aligning with anything by saying this. Truly, I've been talking about this for years. But food dyes, they change the structure of the protein that they're attached to. And so your immune system is more likely to react to it as though it's a foreign invader. So just highly ultra processed foods is going to tripwire the immune system. The more whole foods we can eat, the better. Protein, plants, fibers, getting a wide variety of these. Have you ever heard of the Walls protocol? Are you familiar with Dr. Terry Walls?
Yeah.
Okay, so I love her. I love her work. She has
Great
MS.
for MS. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. But the reason for it is it supports the mitochondria, it's low inflammatory, and it's also so rich with antioxidants. Antioxidants are very, very important for the lining of the gut to make sure we prevent that barrier breakdown. Also super, super supportive of the liver, so it helps us clear out. Tiffany mentioned environmental toxins earlier. We cannot reduce our exposure, or we can't limit our exposure to all the environmental toxins out there, but we sure can support the systems within our own body that help to process and clear them out. So her Walls protocol, and hold on to your hats because this can be a little overwhelming, but it is 9 cups of produce every single day. And it's broken down into 3 categories. So it's your highly pigmented food. So anything that you cut, it's the same color on the inside as the outside, like a carrot or a peach or a blueberry, 3 cups of that, 3 cups of your green leafies. So your arugula, your Swiss chard, kale, broccoli, and then 3 cups of sulfur-rich veggies. So your cruciferous veggies like cauliflower, cabbage, onions, garlics, leeks, shallots. So that's so much. So it's totally fine if you can't do that. Do what you can. Even if you're doing 1 cup from each category every single day, that's going to get you pretty good variety. That's going to give you a lot of antioxidants. It's going to give you a lot of fiber to feed the beneficial species. So just trying to rotate out what you're consuming is a really, really good bet. Like I said, some people are going to be more reactive to gluten and dairy. I don't know. You can arm wrestle me on that. Just what I'm seeing from my clinical experience, gluten and autoimmunity generally don't play nice in the sandbox together. However, we do have lab testing. So if you want the data to say, yeah, my immune system is reacting in real time to the proteins within wheat, we can do that. So we know if that's really something that we need to avoid altogether. Casein, one of the proteins within dairy, can also be an immune trigger for some people, sometimes eggs, sometimes soy. That's where it gets a bit more individualized.
I just think those things can be helpful too, because you want to focus on where you're going to get the most effects, and you can do all these things. You can take out gluten and take out dairy and take out sugar and just eat all these things and have this very restricted diet, and probably for a lot of people who have autoimmunity and otherwise feel really good. But you kind of want to pick your battles. So I do think if you have the ways and means, like, I think personally, this is my opinion, I think testing for some of those things can be helpful so that I know, do I need to focus my energy on really cutting out gluten entirely? Because, you really have to go to a little bit of effort to do that. Or am I minimizing these processed foods because that's not what my body's reactive to, and focusing on something else that's really big? Because everyone with autoimmunity has some of these key pieces that they can focus in on. But not everyone, some people prefer just to do the elimination diets to see how they feel. Everyone has such different opinions.
Depending on the person and depending on the case, I kind of will prefer an elimination diet to food sensitivity testing, and it depends on the food sensitivity test. But some people will do them and they will be lit up like a Christmas tree. And so they think that they're like, I can't eat any of these foods. And it's like, well, not necessarily. We might be it might be an issue with lack of oral tolerance, where we need to like stabilize and work on the immune system. It might be more of a microbiome issue, and so we actually have to work on the health of the gut. So I think you have to just be mindful when you're doing the food sensitivity test that you're in a headspace to really understand what the data means and how to utilize that data to your advantage and like not to your detriment.
Thank you for saying that, because I do think that's a common one too, where they just come with so many and then you have nothing to eat.
And the more you avoid those foods, especially if they're some of the plant matter, the more you avoid those foods, you can actually dig yourself further and further into the hole. Because what you see is that even with a low FODMAP diet, 6 weeks of low FODMAP diet, you can see hit to beneficial species. Beneficial bacteria species. So if you're going to do any type of elimination style diet, any type of more restrictive diet, you want to utilize that short term. Even elimination style diets are designed to be used short term. So you're not restricting, the food sources of the beneficial bacteria, because that's going to set you up for long-term negative consequences.
Short term, even though they take a while.
Yeah. 3 weeks.
They can.
A really long time.
Yes. So I think a lot of those familiar culprits, which, I think can sound really simplified, but I think is a really great reminder of the importance of eating all of the abundance of nature, and, looking at what's fresh and having variety and getting lots of fiber and protein and plant sources, which have always been a fan of. My first book, I talked a lot about the importance of these simple things. But I think when we look at autoimmunity, being able to have some of the specifics and having someone like Erin on your team to be able to really decode and kind of tap into which of those buckets are going to be most helpful is obviously such an important asset to have as well. Any last things you want to add? Anything we haven't? I feel like we've hit a lot of great topics.
I think parting words here, I would just remind everybody that whether or not you're dealing with the mystery health syndromes and you're like, maybe it's autoimmunity, I don't know, or you do have a diagnosed condition, your body knows how to heal itself. I've seen this time and time and time again. And so, yes, our current understanding tells us that there's no cure for autoimmunity, but remission is possible. And your body has the innate capacity to heal, like Wolverine style. It knows what to do. It knows how to self-heal. We just need to figure out ways that we're interrupting that process. And that's a huge part. I think that's like a little like sidecar, no matter what treatment protocol or strategy you're attempting, that always needs to come with it as like a little sidecar, is like, my body knows how to heal. And that can be such a supportive mantra or affirmation on any healing journey. It certainly was on mine. And I believe in it wholeheartedly.
I love that. And I think it's so important to remember that there is hope. Sometimes it's a journey. It's not always, I think we're so used to in the society going to a healthcare provider and, getting a pill or receiving a treatment and being kind of done for many of us. And for many of us, I think in the yoga world, we are more familiar with this idea that our health and wellness is a journey. And especially with something complex like autoimmunity, that we can appreciate, if you do know you have autoimmunity, that there is a complexity to it. And that's okay. It doesn't mean it's all doom and gloom. It just means that it's going to be a little bit more of a process. And you do want to have some great practitioners on your team and, working with this immune system, which is intelligent, although maybe amped up and maybe overly responsive and pro-inflammatory potentially, but in a way that's trying to protect us. It just needs a little bit of guidance to find the right way to heal and repair. And, as Erin mentioned earlier, the importance of finding and working with things earlier is so key, which is why I love having this podcast on here. Is just that educational component is so important. We talked about those 6 buckets, which I think are just a really interesting thing to keep top of mind. The importance of food and nutrition, our digestion and our gut, things like microbiome, etc., infections, environmental toxins, stress, and then of course our mindset, beliefs, and trauma being such a really big part of that. We talked a bit about just the importance of whole foods, and again, just a simple place to start. So if you haven't really found a provider yet and are wanting to start, I think these are things that myself and Erin and probably a lot of healthcare providers would appreciate, as people starting with, is just trying to clean up your diet, looking for more plants and more protein and more fiber and bright colored vegetables and fruits and leafy greens. And, starting there is a great place to begin. And I know that you have a lot of resources as well. Anything, what do you want to share with people to get them started, or?
So my podcast is probably the best place to get started. There's just a lot of information. Everything we talked about today, we go into way more depth. That's the Functional Nutrition Podcast. Is that what it's called? It is. That's what it's called. Okay. So
with a K, functional with a K.
Yes, functional with a K. I am the Functional Nutritionist on Instagram. So I do spend a fair amount of time over there, for better or for worse. And we do have a virtual practice. And one thing that we really want to do for your audience is some of the lab testing that we were talking about, the one that I referenced the most was the stool test. I think that is kind of crucial for anybody struggling with autoimmunity or ongoing mystery symptoms. And so we will offer $50 off for your listeners. And I'm sure you guys can include all that good stuff in the show notes. So if you want to run a stool test, if you've never done one for yourself, you can save $50.
Yeah. And as you guys can all see, Erin is a wealth of information. I have so much respect for her and her work. And, she's dedicated her life to all of these wonderful things that we've been talking about. And whether you're a patient looking for resources on autoimmunity and beyond, you can see on her social media, she has many different topics that she talks passionately about, some of which we've tapped into in this conversation. Or if you're a healthcare provider or nutritionist, she's got a lot of excellent trainings, as I mentioned before, that really go above and beyond. That is so important when we're talking about complex issues like autoimmunity. So check her out, social media, her podcast, great resources, and then obviously the website. Is it functionalnutrition.com, I'm assuming? I don't even know.
Functionalnutritionist.com.
Thanks for listening to Yoga Medicine. If you like the show, please be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you got something out of this episode, please spread the word and share it with a friend. You can find more information, articles, trainings, and classes at yogamedicine.com, or check us out on social media as Yoga Medicine. You can also email us at info@yogamedicine.com. Thank you for being a part of our Yoga Medicine community. We look forward to seeing you again. The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.